The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. while I was doing 70 on I-84, 40 minutes from home, and the voice on the other end said the words acute respiratory failure about my 102-year-old father. Snow crossed my headlights. My hands stayed steady on the wheel of my F2 500, while the ear nurse, Richards, told me my father needed a signature on emergency authorization before 6th outer A. Email. I told her I'd be there in 3 to 5 minutes and hung up. Then I called my wife. Adrienne answered on the third ring with that smooth board meeting warmth she used on everyone. I'm here, Lawrence. I'm with him right now. You don't need to rush. Relief hit me like a wave. 25 years as a systems engineer had taught me to trust data, and Adrienne's voice was the most reliable data point I had. I eased off the gas. Then I heard it behind her. A pleasant, automated female voice. This is your floor. I froze. Hartford Hospital was built in 1957. Its elevators clanged with bells, not voices. That sound belonged to a hotel. I didn't say anything. I just hung up, sat in silence for 3 seconds, and pressed the accelerator back down to 85. I didn't call her back. I didn't confront her. 25 years of engineering had taught me one rule: gather all the data before you troubleshoot. So I drove, turning the question over. Why would my wife lie about being at my dying father's bedside? Adrienne didn't take reckless risks. She planned everything, which meant this lie had a purpose. At the hospital, the receptionist told me no visitors had been logged for my father all night. No, Adrienne. The head nurse, Ursula, corrected that my wife had arrived at 10:12 p.m. said she needed to call me before signing anything and left by 10:18. That was 3 hours before her call to me. 3 hours she'd spent somewhere else, constructing an alibi from a hotel elevator. The ear doctor needed my signature immediately. My father was declining. Oxygen wasn't enough. Intubation might be next. I signed without reading. Then I went up to see him. Room 4012. Ernest Frost, 102 years old, former federal judge, lay against white pillows with an oxygen mask fogging faintly. When I took his hand, his eyes opened. Sharp, clear judge's eyes. He pulled the mask aside and asked one question. You came alone? Not really a question, a confirmation of something he'd suspected for years. The next morning, I asked hospital security for the footage. Derek Walsh pulled up camera 4B. At 10:19 p.m., Adrienne walked into my father's room in her camel coat. Through the window, I watched her lean over his bed, phone raised, not checking his vitals, not reading his chart, taking a selfie. 8 seconds of posing next to my unconscious father. Then she straightened, checked the photo, and walked out at 10:15. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. No nurse contact, no paperwork. Just proof of presence for someone who wasn't watching in person. I drove home, opened our joint calendars, and started cross-referencing. Every overnight work trip I'd taken in the past 6 months lined up exactly with an evening foundation event on Adrienne's schedule. 17 matches. Then I pulled credit card statements. 11 of those 17 nights showed dinner charges at upscale restaurants in New Haven, a city with no reason for her to be in 45 minutes from home. Same window every time, $250. Always while I was 3 states away, trusting her completely. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text meant for the family iCloud account we'd shared since 2019. A message from a contact saved only as L. I opened the old MacBook that still synced to that account. A conversation going back to September. By October, I don't want you to see this side of me. By November, we both know this is wrong. We both know we're not stopping. Hotel names, dates that matched my Albany trips exactly. I didn't need to read further. The evidence existed and it wasn't going anywhere. I walked 4 houses down and knocked on Vernon Townsend's door. He'd seen Adrienne leave the hospital in a hurry around 10:15 the night before while he was picking up a prescription. He agreed without hesitation to say so officially if it ever mattered. The next morning at the hospital, a nurse pulled me aside. A cart attendant, Dwight Diaz, had seen something the cameras missed, Adrienne, in a blind spot by the equipment room, handing a white envelope to a stranger in a navy jacket. The man had walked into an empty maintenance room for 2 minutes, then positioned himself in a chair outside my father's door with coffee and a newspaper, playing the part of devoted family. He was still there that morning. His name was Michael Torres. He'd been hired through a gig app. 3 days, 900. Paid up front through Venmo from an account linked to Adrienne's foundation card. Memo line. Fund expenses. His only job was to look like family. Don't interact with staff. Don't go near the patient. Just be visible enough that anyone checking on Ernest would assume someone who loved him was keeping watch. That afternoon, a woman was waiting for me in the hospital lobby. Celeste Cooper, mother of a 13-year-old named Nicolette at the private school Adrienne's foundation funded. Nicolette had been bullied since September, physically, socially, online. Celeste had filed a formal complaint in October. The principal stalled her for weeks, then told her the claims were unsubstantiated and suggested she pull her daughter out. Nicolette had stopped eating for 3 weeks. Celeste handed me a printed email chain, the principal writing to Adrienne that the situation needed to be handled delicately before the January gala. Adrienne's reply, "Let's settle this amicably before the fundraiser. Can't afford controversy." I brought in a financial advisor, Otis Gallagher, who'd been sitting on a spreadsheet for months, waiting for someone to ask the right question. 3 wire transfers, September, October, November, from a real estate developer named Murray Callahan, totaling $1.5 million into a non-profit shell company Adrienne had personally registered that July. Meridian Education Partners LC, 0 programs funded, 0 disbursements, just money sitting there earning interest. Memo line reading, Educational Partnership Development. Murray Callahan's child was the one who had bullied Nicolette. Every transfer landed within days of a key moment in Nicolette's case. The complaint, the stall, the settle amicably email. This wasn't a donation pattern. It was payment for silence, laundered through a school foundation. I brought in a digital forensic specialist, Sterling Fitzgerald, who still had admin access to our old shared iCloud account. He recovered a draft email composed at 10:44 p.m. on the night my father was admitted. 36 minutes before Adrienne's iCloud keychain was wiped clean, an hour before the hospital even called me. The email was addressed to my father's estate attorney. Subject line, Nicolette Contingency Legal Exposure Minimization. In it, Adrienne requested a plan to challenge my father's mental competency if he tried to add Nicolette to his will, backed by falsified medical records she'd already arranged with a nurse on staff. She had paid a $50,000 retainer for this 4 days before Ernest collapsed. She hadn't panicked when he got sick. She'd been counting down to it. I sat with Adrienne's young intern, Leonie Rivera, at a coffee shop in New Haven. She was 23, in love with my wife, and terrified. She admitted she'd seen the email about settling Nicolette's case in November and said nothing. I didn't ask her to betray Adrienne. I asked her to choose for once on behalf of a child instead of a relationship. I gave her my number and left. Days later she called, shaking. Adrienne had threatened to have her deported if she talked to me, but Leonie had made her decision anyway. She had a file Adrienne sent her in November, step-by-step instructions for suppressing inheritance claims from vulnerable children. Not just Nicolette, 2 others going back to 2019 and 2021. This wasn't a single fraud. It was a system Adrienne had run for years. Adrienne, sensing she was losing control, filed an emergency restraining order against me, citing emotional instability, with the hearing scheduled for the same day as an emergency $1 million grant she was pushing through the foundation, and the same day as a board meeting a coordinator named Stella Jarvis had quietly helped me arrange. Stella had watched this exact pattern play out a year earlier with another family and $890 million that vanished. She gave me a slot on the board's closed-door agenda before Adrienne could move the money. I walked into that boardroom with a folder. I played a recording, obtained legally with consent, of Adrienne instructing a PATA president to lie under oath about Nicolette's enrollment. I showed the forensic timeline. Her iCloud wiped 24 minutes before my father's hospital call. I showed the $1.5 million shell company transfer with no legitimate use. Then Leonie walked in uninvited and placed a USB drive on the table, the suppression file, naming 3 children by name. The board chair read it aloud in front of everyone. Silence lasted 8 full seconds. Then he suspended Adrienne on the spot and adjourned the meeting. That evening, my father's condition turned. I sat with him through the night. At noon the next day, he rallied, lucid, and asked me to tell him everything that had happened. I did. When I finished, he said only, "Good, you did it right. Not revenge, justice." Then he closed his eyes. That afternoon, Adrienne called. My father took the phone from my hand himself, held it to his ear, and delivered his verdict in the same flat, absolute tone he'd used on the federal bench for 40 years. You used a child's vulnerability for financial gain. You threatened a young woman with deportation to silence her. You betrayed your husband while I was dying. A pause then. I have no daughter named Adrienne. He ended the call and set the phone down. In the bedside drawer was a codicil he'd signed that same morning before any of it, witnessed by hospital staff. Nicolette Co-Opper. 1. 2 million in trust. Me, the rest of the estate. Adrienne 0, with a note citing the evidence I'd provided. He'd finalized it legally hours before delivering the verdict in person. Both irrevocable, both his. Meanwhile, the machinery I'd built kept running without me. The foundation froze Adrienne's accounts. The heirs opened a money laundering investigation within hours of receiving the referral and froze the shell company's funds. The state opened an inquiry into the school's failure to report Nicolette's bullying. Adrienne's law firm dropped her the moment her accounts were frozen, and the restraining order hearing collapsed for lack of representation. I hadn't needed to fight any of it directly. I'd only needed to feed the system good evidence and let it process. 2 days later, Celesta brought Nicolette to the hospital to meet me. The girl who'd once curled into herself at a car return now stood straight, met my eyes, and said only, "Thank you." She asked to meet her grandfather. I brought her in. Ernest took her hand in his and said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner." She told him he was protecting her now. They sat together in silence for a long while, and it was worth more than anything a courtroom could have given her. Ernest went home 2 days after that, back to his own chair by the south window, off every monitor, done with hospitals. He asked me to sit with him and do nothing. No phone, no evidence, no next move. Just be present. I hadn't done that in years. We sat through an entire afternoon while the light moved slowly across the kitchen floor. That evening, Adrienne called one last time, asking if after everything she was still my wife. I told her she'd chosen money over a child's dignity, and now it was my turn to choose. I hung up. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closing a book I'd finally finished and setting it down where it belonged. If you've ever trusted someone completely and found out the trust was the weapon they used against you, I understand. I spent 14 years assuming that love meant never asking hard questions. What I learned is that real love survives scrutiny. Only performance needs to hide from it. When the people closest to you betray you, don't reach for anger. Reach for evidence. Build the case the way you'd build anything that has to hold weight, patiently, with proof, one verified fact at a time. And when you finally have to choose between protecting the past you thought you had and protecting someone who actually needs you, choose the person who needs you every time.